Thank you so much for joining me, guys. I'm J. Michael Whalen, and I run a small imprint by the name of Pisces Rising Press. We are a children's literature company. We are currently releasing picture books, and we are actually going to be moving into more advanced storytelling for older kids. We'll also be doing picture books as well, but for this series of videos, I'm going to be taking you step by step through the process of writing the next book. One of the reasons I started Pisces Rising Press as an imprint was that I had recently become a father a few years ago, and I kept seeing a lot of stories that just didn't remind me of the great stories that I used to be read to. It seemed like a lot of political agendas being pushed. I'm a firm believer that storytelling is about a character overcoming a difficulty, or perhaps it's a character overcoming a difficulty, depending on how you look at it. So nonetheless, I wanted to start a company in which stories were about that. And from there, you can actually learn lessons about life, about perseverance, about actually hard work. And so here we are. This is a great example. It's going to show you that hard work from an idea will actually bear fruit, and it'll be a tangible book. The other aspect is that I noticed my son spending entirely too much time on tablets and reading books on tablets. I could not stand that. It just drove me nuts. Books and the tactile feel of flipping through pages is so vitally important on a sensory input level. However, it also takes away a lot of the experience of being a parent reading to a small kid. I know when I would lay down in bed with my son when he was 1 and 2 years old, and I would read books to him, it was incredible. Like, he reads at an astonishing rate right now. And I firmly believe, because since he was born, he saw me reading from actual books every night, and he is currently just devouring book after book, and I think it has a lot to do with that. I know a lot of people generally have a lot of questions as to how do you put together a book. So with these videos, I'm going to be taking you step by step through the different parts of it. There's a lot of it, but as they say, take one bite of the elephant at a time and you'll get through it. So we're going to touch on concept, note cards, which is very important, in which you structure out the story. I learned this technique from David Lynch, and he has a phenomenal book called Catching the Big Fish. In there, he describes his technique for storytelling, and I gotta say, I was sort of doing something similar to it, but then after I read that, I said, you know what, I'm not gonna question this guy's technique, and I think I'm gonna keep going with it. So you're gonna see sort of a mad dash through note card taking, in which we come up with everything that you could possibly think of in your story, from character names, little descriptions about them, locations, plot points, and it doesn't matter. Like, you just get them all out and then sort them out from there. So we're gonna be talking about the structuring of those note cards in a coherent order. And then from there, we're gonna actually write the book. So that obviously takes a long time. For me, I do a tremendous amount of writing as well. I've written screenplays and comic books and various things, short stories, of course. So the writing aspect I can handle, and I'm fairly confident in that. However, the reason I'm confident is because I plan them out very meticulously. So that hopefully is what I will be able to instill in you. And from there, we're gonna have to send that manuscript off to an editor. I love to write. I don't like to proofread. Yeah. High school was a little bit rough there. The aspect of hiring an editor, potentially an illustrator, even though I like to illustrate it myself, I think what I have in mind isn't that elaborate, and I can do it. I do have a little bit of experience as an illustrator. So we'll touch base on hiring an illustrator as well. From there, we're gonna do the formatting, and then hopefully by the last episode of this little series, you're gonna have a tangible book in front of you. Thank you so much for joining me. I absolutely appreciate you coming, swinging by, and if you have any comments or questions, please leave them in the comment section below. I respond to all of them. It drives me crazy when people have like 5 subscribers and they just don't take the time to actually respond to questions that I have. I am not that guy. I will respond. Take my word for it. I will see you around, and be like water, my friends. How's it going, guys? Thank you so much for coming back. It really means a lot to me. Hopefully you've gone through the introductory episode and you have gotten a pretty good idea and a good sense as to where I want to take this company. I have my own opinions about ebooks, and this is one thing that may not have come through too clearly on the previous episode. As far as I can, I am going to not have any Kindle versions of any of our books, at least for the children's side of things. I am so against little kids, even like preteens being on tablets too much. It just disturbs me. So I do not want to contribute to that. I'll be having all of my books as tangible books, and since this is my company, we're not going to be doing PDFs. We're not going to be having Kindle versions of our books because I don't want them on digital formats. And that's that. Is that too mean? I don't think it's too mean. It's exactly what I want it to be. Now, for something down the road, I do plan on doing other genres, maybe not under the Pisces Rising Press moniker, but maybe down the road I'll have that as Kindle versions, but those are not intended for kids. Not at all. Some really crazy stuff I have planned. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me, and let's get into the most important part of this whole thing by far. More than, do you know how to draw? More than, do I have an editor? More than, how many pages is this book going to be? Is story. Story is one thing that tends not to get as much attention as it should. It needs to be all of your effort. It has to go into the story. From how it's edited, does it serve the story? How it's illustrated, does it serve the story? Yes, it should. So let's just jump right into it. I have a lot of opinions. I have a lot of opinions. One of the things that a lot of people tend to ask me about is, where do you get your ideas from? Sometimes I do have snarky answers. Like Stephen King was famous for saying that he belongs to a service where every week this idea service sends him ideas in the mail. And people will actually believe that. It's not true, guys. It's not true. Ideas for stories are all around you at all times. This is something that I think you need to train yourself if you want to be a writer or an artist of any kind, a musician even. Look for the most minute things in everyday life. I mean, they can trigger huge things in your imagination. If you don't have kids, I get it, but kids will give you ideas like you can possibly imagine just by listening to them. Hearing them talk about their day, how their imagination sort of goes wild, is fantastic. Obviously, the younger they are, the better it kind of is, because you can get some really wild opinions on things or sort of misunderstandings of how things operate. And that is certainly one thing that I do want to talk about. Misunderstanding things, but intentionally misunderstanding things. This is a thing, it's sort of a little technique that I did when I was in my script writing class in college. It was eavesdropping. Now, that can get kind of strange and a little bit odd, but look, we live in a day and age of social media where everybody is telling you everything anyway. So maybe if you just crick your head out a little and you hear a little bit something going on at a coffee shop, is it really that big of a deal? Point being, if you go to any public place, coffee shops are great, I love coffee, and you just start hanging out and listening to what people are talking about, and you do not have a context as to what the conversation is, and then start jotting down notes. You then can listen to other people's conversations going on, jot down notes there. If you mix and match them, you can come up with some bizarre stories and bizarre bits of dialogue. That's a great technique. It really frees you up. Even if it's complete gibberish and doesn't make any sense, and it's something that like Lewis Carroll would have in The Rabbit Hole, it will still trigger something to you. You'll be like, well, it's just so far-fetched, I can't possibly do that. Doesn't make any sense. But you know what? if I did have these characters as two well diggers or chimney sweeps or whatever, it would then sort of make a little bit more sense, and then you steer that conversation onto a different platform. I'm a big fan of eavesdropping people watching. People watching is phenomenal. Do that as much as you possibly can. It inspires everything from character design to how people talk. Watching somebody walk down the street can actually trigger off a lot of ideas as to, well, where that person comes from. You know, that's a really interesting way of walking. It kind of reminds me of like a cowboy. What's a cowboy doing in a hard hat? I don't know. Maybe he's a cowboy construction worker. Things like that can come to you organically. And the number one thing I always tell people, no matter what the discipline is that they want to get into, you need to get out more. We are coming out of a horrible period in which everybody was locked inside, everybody was glued to Netflix or their tablet or whatever, Zoom. God bless them, but you know what? Like, I just can't. I just can't. Number one thing is just get out, experience things, see things for yourself, and just go in with an open mind. So much of writing in any discipline is the creative mindset. At this very beginning, the inception stage, you need to just start throwing things out like left and right. I mean, pick things up, mish this with that, mix and match, have a nice little fruit salad. And do not forget some kind of writing pad. You can use a phone if you want. Notes, whatever. I'm a big fan of note cards. I buy 500 note cards at a time and I tear through them like crazy. And you'll see that most likely in the next episode when we start to get into the note card aspect of things. So the number one thing is you need to come up with these ideas organically and on your own to some extent. What you do not want to do, and I have seen this time and time again, especially in film, is that people chase trends. This is a horrific idea. Do not do this. I know what's out there, and it's like this person is just crushing it with this character. These books are doing really well. Maybe I could write something just like that. Don't. Okay? The reason those stories are successful, those characters are successful, is because that creator lived and breathed them. It's part of them. It is not part of you. You as an audience member may enjoy it, may love it, but it is not you. It's the creator. It's a part of the creator. What is part of you? And that is something you need to find out for yourself. What characters inspire you to want to write? Because I can tell you one thing right now, and I've seen it time and time again, people will jump onto these bandwagons and start trying to mimic everybody else, and they run out of steam. And why do they run out of steam? Because it's not their own. It's not their thing. It just isn't. They're chasing a trend, they're trying to get the money, and it is not going to work out. Even if you freight train that idea and it's not your own and you manage to get the book done and you get it out, you are not going to stick with it at all. You're not going to have the long haul discipline to go for 20 plus years with the same characters because they are just not really you. Focus on what is you. Create those characters that make you actually smile. Trend chasing and money grabs will be sniffed out like you wouldn't believe, especially by kids. Kids can tell authenticity from the bogus replicas from 10 miles out. Take my word for it. When you and I were kids, we could. And the kids today can still do the same thing. Do not fall into that trap. You will waste your time. You are sometimes looking at potential lawsuits if you are copying certain people's characters a little too closely. Don't want to mention names, but there are a handful of characters out there that are just begging for lawsuits from major companies, okay? Like they just are stone's throw away from being sued for copyright infringement. Don't do that. Come up with your own ideas. Come up with your own characters. Live and love them. One thing that I did want to mention is that you do not have to be, by any stretch of the imagination, an expert on any sort of subject matter that you're writing about, unless it comes down to nonfiction and it's very specific. You kind of do at that point. As long as you're interested enough to do the research in order to become knowledgeable enough to write a story about it. That's all that really kind of matters at this point, especially if you're dealing with a narrative. Fiction, you can get away with a lot. There's a lot of embellishment that you can do. However, if you are writing nonfiction and this is sort of like a textbook idea, yeah, I kind of do need to have experts in with you at least. At the very least, you need to be able to send your manuscript to those brainiacs out there that are phenomenal at that field. They will then look over it, and that's great, that's fine. You don't have to get a PhD in rocket science to write stories about space travel. You can find somebody at NASA who will look it over and give them a little bit of cash here and there, and then you have them as a technical advisor. The one thing you have to understand is that writing a story, writing a book, coming up with these characters, this is a long haul, okay? This is not a sprint, this is a marathon, and it is much longer than you think it will be. It just is. There's no way around it. There's a lot of people out there that will tell you, oh, you can do this in 20 days, you can do this in 15 days. You really can't. You could, but guess what? It wouldn't be that great, okay? Like, there's a reason certain books take years to write, certain films take years to produce, certain concertos took lifetimes to put together. You can tell, okay? Like, you just can't. So think about the long haul, not a sprint. Just go at a nice leisurely pace. You will not burn out. Avoid burnout at all costs, okay? This will save you infinite amounts of heartache. Chipping away at your story in your book is the number one thing. Do not think of this as some kind of mad dash in which you just have to bludgeon through it, go through those brick walls, smash through all that stuff, and then you'll be at some kind of finish line. This is a small chipping away, and that's what you need to look at it as. Now, this may be discouraging to some of you, but some people chip faster than others, okay? And some chips are bigger than your chips. It's okay. We all end up with a book at the end of the day. We all end up as writers. Go at your pace. No, it's not a race. It just isn't, okay? One thing that I also want to talk about is that your idea is an idea. It's an idea. It's not a story yet, okay? Very different things. And a lot of people do get confused with it. I have lots of people that come up to me and they tell me about their great ideas for stories. And then when I'm like, well, what is the idea of the story? They'll say, fast cars. That's not a story, guys. It just isn't. Okay, that's an idea. That's something to start with. That's a concept, maybe. But stories, and it needs to be reiterated time and time again, is that it is a beginning, a middle, and an end. Okay? That's what stories are. You have a character who starts at point A and goes all the way to point Z. And in that time, he or she becomes a much better character. They learn things. Not necessarily skills, but they just learn how to be better people. That's a story. One transitions to another. So, beginning, middle, end. Within the beginning, middle, and end, there are different things. There's certain, like, breaks. You could call them acts. It works for plays. It works for films. It'll work for you. So if you think about that, and we definitely will get into the whole idea of acts as I get into the next episode with note cards and story structure. More on that later. So once you have your idea, keep going. Flesh it out. That's awesome. Like if it's space travel, fast cars, toxic waste, the internet, creating some kind of digital animal, whatever. Does that make sense? Maybe it does. I think it does. If that does make sense, I'm copywriting it. But the one thing that I think everybody needs to really take away from is that your idea, if it gets you really excited, that is awesome and that is where you need to be. Okay? That is part of this whole thing, is that we need to do things that excite us as writers. Again, It's a long haul. It's not a sprint. You need to be excited because there are going to be days as you are sitting there in front of either your yellow legal pad as you write it out by hand, your word processor, or whatever it is that you're working on, whatever format you like to write in. And you're just going to be staring at that and realizing I have got so much more work ahead of me, okay? It's a long haul. It's a nice little jog, and just go with it. When you have your idea, start to think about the beginning, the middle, and an end that fits within that idea. If it's something like I had mentioned, fast cars, well, what is it? Maybe the characters are cars. Maybe it's a mechanic. Maybe it's a kid building a go-kart. And then you say, well, you know, maybe the kid doesn't have a go-kart, but he needs to get one because he wants to be a go-kart racer. So, okay, well, that's a problem, and that's great. You have somebody who has a desire, but no means. That is maybe story 101 right there. How's he going to get the go-kart? Maybe he's really good with his hands. Maybe he can actually build it out of a lawnmower. And so then there you go. You have that whole setup. You need more conflicts. Maybe he doesn't have the money to buy the gas for the go-kart. Maybe he can't afford the entry fee. So then that becomes another problem that needs to be solved. So start coming up with ideas like that. Right at this point, you don't necessarily need to have anything 100% locked in. Keep it very fluid, keep it very easy going. The fact is, up until the moment you are actually committing those words to paper, you can play around quite a bit. It doesn't have to be so serious, it doesn't have to be so locked down. Even when you're writing it, you can keep a little bit of fluidity to things, but more on that later. More on that later. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you being here. And like I said, comments, questions, put it all below. Do the thing, hit the bells, subscribe and like if you want. No pressure. I'll see you next time. And as always, be like water, my friends. Thank you so much for joining me yet again, guys. I greatly appreciate it. So in this episode, we're going to get in depth in the idea that I had brought up about the note cards. And it's a technique that I've used for years. It has always worked for me. I hope that it works for you. If not, maybe you can springboard from it to another idea that you have that could help you flesh out your ideas. So this one, I had done a few years prior, and I'm not really sure 100% where I got the idea from. It might have been a writer that I had been researching, and he had a tremendous amount of note cards in front of him, and he said that that's how he can keep things straight. I could understand that, to be honest. I have a lot of scattered ideas. Sometimes the endings come first, sometimes the middles come first, sometimes it's just these characters, I don't know what they're doing. So when you write them down, you can actually start to rearrange them in a correct way. But I'll get into that. If you haven't liked and subscribed yet, please do. It really does help me. And as always, I'm available for answers if you have any questions, comments, anything like that. I really do look forward to reading your stuff. So please don't hesitate, send those in. So years and years ago, when I was about 20 years old, I really started to get into writing seriously. I was always writing, but when I was 20, I decided to write a screenplay, and I had literally no idea what to do. Like, I had no idea that there's a format. I wrote it. It looks sort of like a play. I basically just jumped in and quickly found that I would get about 3 pages in and then just hit a roadblock. I was like, well, what are they going to do next? Well, then figure it out after about a week. Write another 4 or 5 pages, hit another roadblock. Then I was kind of thinking, well, you know, maybe if I planned this out, we would be in a much better position. So sure enough, shortly after that, I started to invest in little note cards, and before that, it was actually like just on a legal pad. I had all this chicken scratch, and the way I think, as I'd mentioned before, it would just be little fragments here that could possibly be the ending. Maybe it's the beginning, maybe it's the middle. I really didn't know, but on a linear piece of paper, it all just was a jumbled mess. So then I decided, well, maybe I'll just cut these out, and I cut them out with scissors, and then I was rearranging it, and then I was like, maybe I should actually use note cards. Yeah. So then I hit up the local office supply store and started to buy note cards, and voila, like literally the silver bullet. I could put things together, rearrange them, mix and match, and it was just incredible. It like became totally streamlined, and that is what you need to do with your idea for a story. So I had done that for a couple of scripts that I had written, maybe a short story, but it was around that time I was heavily involved in screenwriting. I still am to some extent. During this period, about 10 years ago possibly, I was really into the work of David Lynch. I still am. But he had written a book, and I knew that he was very much into transcendental meditation. And I know a lot of people out there don't want to know about it, or they think it's odd. This is David Lynch, guys, come on. Nonetheless, he had written a book called Catching the Big Fish, and I bought it, and I promise you it just absolutely is an incredible book. If you are into his work and sort of understanding his way of working, it opens up a tremendous amount of understanding. Now, that doesn't provide much clarity to a lot of his works, but you do sort of understand why he did what he did. And in it, he talks about not just the meditation part of it, but also being able to use note cards and writing down just about anything that comes into your mind. What you have to do is to just suspend thought to some extent, and just as these things come to you, jot them down on note cards. It could be anything, literally like a zoo, a sandwich. You just have whatever pops into your head, jot it down on a note card. Don't worry about sorting it out just yet, because that's not what we're talking about right now. We're just getting these things that come to you, put it down, have it all there, just get it down. That's the number one thing. Write it down. Now, I'm in no way sponsored by David Lynch or anything. I don't even have an affiliate link to that book. I'm pretty sure you can still get it. I would heavily suggest you looking into getting it. It does get a bit abstract. Again, we're talking about David Lynch. However, it will absolutely give you insight into a creative process that you may not even be aware of. And he does talk about the meditation part of it and letting that sort of logical part of your brain detach. And there are these beautiful ideas, and it's just this endless sea of beautiful ideas out there, and they're just there for you to pick out and just pull, and it's 100% true. Now, I'm not saying sit around and wait for ideas to come to you. You have to make an effort. You have to be a willing participant in this. You have to be willing to let it come to you with just fishing, right? Catching the big fish. That's what it's all about. So let's get into it. Enough of me yammering here. I think you want to see actual examples of this. The idea that is floating around in my head is about a little boy who gets a magical camera. That's it. That was just like the big idea. It's a magical camera. I don't know what the camera is going to do. I kind of do know what it's going to do. With that idea, I'm just going to put it out there. It's a little boy, magical camera, then that's going to trigger things off. And so that's the big idea. And when that is out there, I'm going to be catching the big fish with it. Again, a lot of what you are going to do may not make sense to you at all at the beginning, and that's okay. That's perfectly fine. It's not meant to make sense. It's meant to get those ideas out onto something concrete. And when you start to do that, you then are able to build on that. So come on and join me, and let's get to some of that beautiful B-roll footage. So here we are. Basically, as you can see with the note cards, I'm just putting down random things. I'm just putting down characters. Whatever it is that pops into my head is going to be what I put down on the card. Now, obviously, this is somewhat sped up, but it does go pretty quick. And when you start to actually use the note cards and start writing things down, it will just trigger one thing after another, and you're going to have a plethora of cards. I suggest buying at least 100. I mean, I tend to go out and get those, 500 pack ones just because sometimes it does get a little crazy, I'll be honest, and I can't even read my own handwriting. Yeah, I use markers, but nonetheless, get as many as you need, get more than you need, because you will actually use them. They will be used, promise you that. So put down anything that pops into your head, from locations to characters, even bits of dialogue. When that is done, and then you actually can start to go through it and you're sort of feeling things out, feel free to flip that card over and put a little bit more detail into it, because sometimes those ideas just start to pour out and you don't want to lose that momentum. Absolutely great. Jot it down, even if it's just like some kind of cipher and only you can decipher it. Awesome, go for it. One thing you're going to find out is you're going to have a tremendous amount of cards left over that just may not ever get used. You don't have to use them. That's okay. You can either discard them or you can save them. I have a shoebox like right above the camera up there on my shelf, and it's a huge amount of cards that are the excess from various stories. One day I'm very tempted to just merge all those together and come up with some kind of crazy story, because it's a lot of different genres in there. So now that we have the note cards all structured out and lined up in some kind of order that would actually start to make logical sense, we're then going to get into the outlining part of it. So we're going to take those cards, we're going to actually assemble them in a way that resembles a more structured story, and from there we're going to actually type it all up in sort of a bullet point presentation that resembles a pretty standard story with the acts, the beginning, the middle, and the end, the conflicts, the other conflict, and then finally the resolution, and the climax is somewhere in between there. But again, right now it's all very loose, and we're going to be tightening it up. So as you can see, and as you're probably seeing already, this whole process is going to get more and more tight and more refined until the book is completely done, and then you realize how far you've come. That'll wrap it up for this episode. Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to posting in the next one coming up in probably a couple of weeks. We're going to be getting more into the whole writing aspect. That is a bit more of a time-consuming effort. So thanks again, and be like water, my friends. Hello guys, thank you so much for joining me yet again. I greatly appreciate you coming here. As many of you may have noticed, there has been quite a big gap in between my last video and this one. Good reason for that. I'm actually writing the book as we speak. I am currently about 15,000 words into the book. We'll definitely get into the specifics about word count, things like that. A bit about research into the kind of book you want to write is coming up as well. So in this episode, we're going to talk about the writing process and hopefully get you guys a bit more motivated if you are sort of looking at a very long, daunting process, which it is, but it doesn't have to feel that way. Maybe. So basically in this one, we're going to look at the fact that we have now taken the note cards that we have written in the previous episode. If you haven't seen that, go check it out. It's part of the writing process that I live by. I basically have taken all those note cards, put them in chronological order, put them into an outline, and that outline is what you will be basically working from. Now again, this is a refinement process. Now again, the writing process is a pretty fluid one. You should in no way ever feel locked into something. Just at any time, if you decide to change path, you can do that. However, you do need to know where you want to go with it. It's completely fine to look at something on your outline or possibly note cards and say, I just don't think it fits in this. That's awesome, that's great. That's a lot of thought going into it. You're potentially seeing roadblocks that could very well derail your whole story, so good for you. Get rid of it. If you think that you can't use it, get rid of it. So just getting right into it, let's talk about the whole thing. You now should have somewhat of a bullet point outline. This is your whole story. Now, that's not saying you have to be married to it. You can change things up at the last minute as long as you know that what you are changing should fit within the rest of the outline. If not, then that is a big, big issue. This will essentially put you back a couple of steps. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's plenty of times where I've written things that I'm like, I just don't think that this is going in the right direction. And I've scrapped the last third, sometimes the last half. Whatever it is, you have to be prepared to basically go back a step, outline yet again, take a look at it, and if it makes sense and it is a fluid story, that's great. Go for it. However, at a certain point, you do need to actually sit down and write this thing. As you can see, I'm going to be crossing off things as I hit those milestones in the actual book. This is a rough draft, guys. Don't worry so much about the grammar. Just get it out, get it onto the page, move on, keep it going. This is a big, big thing. Now, I say a lot of big things in my presentations here, but momentum is so important. A lot of people don't really focus on that, though they should. One thing that is very helpful is to actually have that outline next to you as you're writing, and as you hit these milestones, you literally cross them off. This is a huge motivational factor for me. I think it could help you as well. So as for the actual writing process, the number one biggest thing, obviously, is that first few words that you put down on that page. It is a big, blank, empty abyss, and it will be filled with your words, and that can sometimes seem like a daunting task that may make you want to reconsider this whole thing. Don't. Just start chipping away, start putting those words down, and get on with it. You're going to come across a lot of things. Now, writing is one of the hardest things you can get into. Distractions, everyday life, just about any excuse you could come up with is a valid excuse to stop writing. Maybe you're hungry, maybe you gotta catch something on TV, maybe you need to send off an email. And I tell you right now that you need to block out all of those things. You have to focus, focus, focus. One of the best things that I do is that I set up word count goals. So every day I will say, you know what, I'm gonna write 500 words. And it's actually not a lot, and that's sort of the point. I have a weekly planner, and then on the side it has little notes, and I put at least 3 check boxes that say 500 words, 500 words, 500 words. So within that week, I am gonna sit down and hit 500 words every single day I sit down to write. Now, a very small goal. The great thing about that is that I blow way past that usually every day that I do write, and by the end of the week, I'm not just 1,500 words into it, I am like 2,500 words through. So that's part of it, is that you sort of psych yourself into hitting higher goals without really meaning to, but you kind of are meaning to do it, right? The number one thing that I can really stress for you is to keep going and keep the momentum going. It's okay to take a day off every so often here and there. It's okay to have somewhat of an erratic schedule because life happens, and I get it. However, you need to keep the ball moving. So I got COVID, I couldn't do anything, even though it would have been a perfect time to sit down and write nonstop. I just didn't. Netflix was calling me. So I basically took about a week, then a week became a week and a half, and then it became like 2 weeks. So I had a 2-week break, and then by the time I sat down to start writing again, it just started to drag on, and every word seemed like endless torture. And so I made it through that day. I hit my 500-word goal, even though it felt like I was writing 5,000 words. The next day, the 500-word goal was not that bad. And then I had to build up, and now I'm back in the swing of things, and I can actually hit those 500 words relatively with no problem. Even if you are feeling bad, keep it going. There's going to be tons of things that happen in your life, and I'm not sure where you are in your lives. Some of you are probably really young, maybe you're going through a breakup, and that can completely stop everything. Your whole life comes to an end. I get it. Take time, lick your wounds, but then essentially get back on that saddle. You got to get back to it quickly, fast. Take my word for it. I didn't realize how far along I really was because I was just writing and looking back at that outline, and then next thing I knew, I thought there were 2 more pages of outline left, and actually it was just 1. I did add a few things in between, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as you know that you are doing that, and you got to be aware that that could possibly have effects on the rest of the story. I had mentioned earlier in this video that I had a 500 word count for the day, and how that 500 words actually equates to 5 pages. Now, a lot of you out there will realize, well, that kind of doesn't equate to 5 pages. How could that? And this is it. The books that I am essentially going to be in line with are Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Timmy Failure, a couple of others along those lines. And what I did was I went through those books and did an average word count for every page. Every book across the board that was in that same genre had a 100-word average. So from there I was able to guess, well, you know, these books are about 200 pages. I'm going to look to hit 20,000 words. So that gave me the rough idea as to the word count that I would want for my book. Now, at about 15,000 words, 16,000 words that I'm at right now, it's 150 pages, 160 pages. That's pretty good. I could feel like I'm not ripping people off at this point. And also, one of the things is that you probably realize that those books have a ton of little illustrations in them. So that's another thing that I need to factor in, at least for time-wise. But with that idea of 100 words per page, I then have a very solid understanding as to where I am in terms of how that book would look. If I were to stop right now at 16,000 words, 160 pages, I'm cool with that. That looks great. That's a thick book. I certainly did not want to have this to look like one of those books that I aspired to compete with, and it's only 25 pages long. I mean, that's a problem. So for this, I'm pretty happy. Obviously, I do have a ways to go. I am essentially at the conclusion. I'm wrapping things up rapidly, and I just don't want the ending to drag, because I do have ideas for the second one. As I was writing this, I got a whole bunch of ideas for the second one, and it would be completely bonkers. I'm so looking forward to sharing more of it with you, especially with some of the character designs I've been noodling around with. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun. There's obviously a ton more work to go. This is just part of the whole thing. The writing aspect is a very, very big part. However, it is still just a part. So nonetheless, I appreciate you joining me. And as always, be like water, my friends. How's it going, guys? Thank you for joining me. J. Michael Whalen here. I know it's been a while since I uploaded a video, and the last time I did, I was sort of talking about the fact that I was maybe halfway or 3/4 of the way through writing the book. Yeah, I actually have finished the book. The book is actually done, and it is in single space. It comes out to about 44 pages. And 18,000 words, just a little over 18,000 words. And so anybody that was with the page for a while has known that I talked about trying to get about 15,000 words to 20,000 words. So I'm very pleased with 18,000, I really am. Some days were a little harder than others. After I was done, I basically took about a week or two off. I just didn't think about it, just let it sort of ruminate that I was completed with my book. I was pretty surprised. And so when I came across the last page of notes, I kind of noticed, wow, like this really is the end. And I just started plugging away, going at it. I stuck pretty close to the outline, I got to admit. So there's a lot to be said for the note card method and also the outlining method, and just sticking to that. That's not to say that there weren't changes. There were a couple of changes here and there, and I'd like to go through them. So one thing, as I was writing the end, I noticed, well, it's good, it's fast-paced, it's got a little bit of pickup to it. But I just wanted to add a little bit more, so then I had the main character's tire on his bicycle blow out. And I was like, okay, well, that's cool. But then, you know, when you think about it, it kind of comes out of nowhere. It's like, well, tire just blows out. That's kind of convenient. So I went back to the beginning, and I added a little sentence or two about how his tire in the front was wearing thin, and he could see that the inner tube was about to burst through, and he was grateful that he made it through another day. And that's at the beginning. So you put that plant and then pay off at the end. And that's what I did. There's a couple other things like that that I put in, and it really pays off. You have to have that sort of little plant pay off at the end, and it's just part of the whole storytelling. Next steps, let's talk about that. Book is done. What I did was, I had mentioned I took about 2 weeks off, and then I went back to it and did what is known as a quick one pass. Went through it, made sure names were spelled correct, and once I found certain things that I needed to fix, I fixed them. Very minor changes. And then I went through, and one thing I did notice was that I named a character who's sort of the bully. Well, no, he actually is the bully. No, sort of the bully. His name Troy, and I thought that was great. I never met a guy named Troy, so there's no animosity towards the name, and I thought that was a good name for a bully. And then I started to actually look into watching Stranger Things. And in the first season, yes, I'm late to the party, guys. I really am. And in the first season, the bully's name's Troy. So I was like, there's a couple of things that may be sort of reminiscent of the show sometimes. Like there's walkie-talkie use, because I had walkie-talkies when I was a kid, so I put it in there. And then all of a sudden, Stranger Things, and I should have watched it a long time ago. That's what the moral of the story is. But anyway, I kept the walkie-talkies in my book, but I changed the name of the bully from Troy to Trent. Never met a Trent either. Actually, I sort of did, and it was a hilarious story, but I can't get into it. It's just too crazy. Also, the name of the teacher is a consistency issue, is Ms. Tilsday, but at the beginning she was known as Mrs. Tilsday. So I had to think about that. I was like, you know what? I'm going to make her a Ms. So I did that, changed that, find and replace, no problem. It was all said and done. I ran it through Grammarly. Wow, that was a lot of mistakes. It was like 493 errors. Now in my defense, I will say that a lot of those quote-unquote mistakes were just euphemisms or made-up words in the dialogue that the kids made up, because that's what we did when we were kids, right? It's just like awesomeness and spectaculatious or whatever. Or maybe it's just me that made this up. It could be. So a lot of those errors were just basically like either names or figures of speech that I created. However, there were a lot of commas that were misplaced or I needed very badly. When it comes to writing the dialogue within a manuscript of a book, it kind of gets a little confusing to me because sometimes things will end with a period and then you put the quotes and it's like so-and-so said, but then sometimes you just keep it as a comma, the quotes, and then so-and-so said. So stuff like that is still a bit of a mystery to me. I'm not 100%. I hate to say it, but it is actually a mystery. I will say you got to keep your eye on it because if you are not careful, it will sort of take your voice away because it'll offer you suggestions that are grammatically correct, but at the same time, it's like, well, that's kind of, yeah, you could say it that way. Obviously, that's the correct way of saying it, but it kind of does diminish your voice as the writer. So keep an eye on that. Plenty of times I just said, you know what, skip or dismiss. I like it the way it is. It's part of the literary flavor, which is basically why we buy certain writers and certain books. It's like I don't care that it's not 100% correct. Next thing I did after all that was done was realize, when I write, I just flat out write. I don't think about chapters. I don't think about anything like that. So I went back and I actually added chapters. Found the little natural breaks in between scenes. And sometimes it worked out really well, sometimes it didn't. So you got to keep in mind the audience that you're writing for is going to be for kids. So having little cliffhangers like that at the end of your chapters doesn't have to be every single one. It could be every so often. It's kind of a good little natural break so that you can pick it up in the next night or the next day and keep them wanting more. And so basically at the end of all this, I kind of realized, you know what, I haven't even given it the official title. So the official title is actually Mark and his magical camera of awesomeness. Thank you. You're welcome. Next up is that I'm going to actually be sending the manuscript that I edited. We know how good I am as an editor, right? So in the next coming episodes, we're going to be basically getting into hiring an editor and illustration. I still want to illustrate this thing, and I will. I have a good idea as to how it's gonna look, but for those following the Instagram page, you're kind of seeing some pretty detailed sketches that I'm doing just on a whim. It's not gonna be that detailed, trust me. It's actually gonna be more like cartoony. It's really tempting to go the route of David Wimpy Kid. However, I kind of see it being a cross between that and Roald Dahl's work on his books. I like the dip pen look, but at the same time, man, that is a messy, dangerous thing to get into. Lots can go wrong, but I do have a clear idea as to what I want it to look like. It's going to be fun. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining me. Always a pleasure to have you here. And if there's any questions or comments, please leave them below. I will answer them, or DM me, whichever you guys do. Follow me on Instagram as well. It's starting to sort of grow. I'm not into this whole social media thing, but I guess I have to. Anyway, thank you so much. And as always, be like water, my friends. How's it going, guys? Thanks for joining me again, and I hope you are all doing well. It's been a while since I last recorded one of these here videos for you, and I just wanted to let you know that I have not been asleep at the wheel. I've actually been really busy, and I got a lot of cool things to show you in the coming videos. In this video, I'm going to be talking about one of the most important aspects of making a kid's book, and that is character design. This is something that should not be underestimated in terms of importance, but more importantly, in terms of time commitment. As you can imagine, it's pretty self-explanatory as to why it's an important part of the process. If you're going to be creating a series, you're going to be living with these characters for a very, very long time, and they do have to be fun to draw, as well as be very appealing to the audience. In terms of time commitment, I can easily say that coming up with the story was a lot easier than coming up with what these characters look like. I had a vague idea of what I thought they would look like, but that was only half of the battle. The other half was the style in which I wanted these characters to be drawn in. As we all know, there's an endless spectrum of styles out there, and finding that style that best help tell your story is going to be as important as the story itself. Take your time, it's not a race. Well, enough about me yammering here. It's time to get into the video. So with pretty much everything when it comes to characters, you tend to adhere to sort of the common beliefs, which are good guys have rounder heads, kids have bigger heads, bigger eyes. Try to stick to that with this and designing the character. This is obviously for the lead character by the name of Mark. Obviously it's called Mark and his magical camera of awesomeness. Really didn't know what I was looking for. When I was writing it, didn't really have any idea as to what he looked like, other than the fact that he had glasses. But here I'm just experimenting with shapes. Looking at them, didn't like it. They look either too old, too young, and just gotta work through it. You know, I just kept on plugging away and drawing shape after shape. For the most part, we tend to look at villains as angular featured characters, so I wanted to go with perhaps a box. Most likely a sphere of some kind for the head, but for the most part, I wanted to stay clear of the sharp angles. I knew he had crazy hair, and just thought if I mixed a rounded off rectangle, maybe I could get to where I wanted to go. Maybe it would trigger something off, but again, it was something about it. Like the character looked a little too old, so I decided to just milk it for a little bit more, have it a little bit more elongated of a head, and once I started putting in the frames of the glasses, I think that's really what it was. That sort of just was the tipping point. And here I really liked how that swoop of hair just sort of popped up out of nowhere, and felt that combined with the smile and the glasses and the skinny neck, that really triggered something off, and I felt really comfortable with it. I felt like I was on the right path at that point. Decided to clean it up a bit, and obviously I had made a mess of it when I was trying to ink it, and as you should basically try to develop your sketches to the point that they become a complete mess, and then go back, refine it as an individual new drawing, and then you start to get closer and closer to what that character will look like. Again, I think I had to make the chin a little bit smaller just to make his face a little bit more of a kid, but not too little. And the hair is really what was doing it for me. That then made me feel like I'm definitely on the right path here. The smile, the glasses, the hair, and the shirt. Which, if anybody has an idea as to who in real life is a real person inspired the design of this character to some extent, let me know in the comments below. I'll let you know if you're right or wrong. But I don't want to tell anybody, because then once you do that, then they're like, oh yeah, I can see it now. But he is actually based on a real person. For the inking of this, I decided to use the, I believe it's a Zebra medium point brush pen. I have mixed feelings about it. I mean, I still think that the Tombow Fudenosuke pens are actually a little bit better, and they only come in hard and soft. This, I think they have three versions, 3 variations of it in the Zebras. They're okay. Nothing will ever beat a Sable number 2 brush with Speedball ink or Winsor & Newton ink. So here is literally the first time I drew the character and was like, this is him. This is absolutely the kid in my story. So I was very happy to capture that on camera, and you'll see him later on in the adventures of the book. And so when it came time to design one of the sidekicks and best friend of Mark, it is a girl who is half Cuban, half Japanese. And again, she's based on the look of a friend of mine, somebody I had met in 7th grade, and she looked very much like the end product of this design. And again, we are going with the rounded face. She's one of the good guys, so I wanted to give her softer features and little eyelashes, 3 of them at the end of it, and hair. Her hair was spiky, the real person I'm talking about. And so for Eden, who's the character, I wanted to do something that was a tribute to that friend of mine, but also something that reminded me of the Hokusai wave, which is the great wave print that we have all seen, just to pay tribute to the Japanese heritage of the character. And it was about here where I was like, yes, this is definitely coming along, and did look like a merger of my friend as well as the character that I'd written in the book. I'm going to do a bit of a cleanup, a little bit more of an attitude towards the face, a little bit more snarkiness going on, and decided to just keep forging ahead with the general head shape, which is essentially a teardrop or a guitar pick. Again with the spiky hair, and inking it up with the Zebra brush pen. Pretty short change. I was able to get done what I wanted to do with the character for the most part. I knew that designing these characters was just a bit of a process, essentially, right? Because I mean, as I was going to get into the full illustration, the characters were inevitably going to shift a little and change, and so sure enough, that's sort of what happened. And of course, she has the blue hair. And now here we go with the triangles. So right off the bat, we know this is not going to be a nice person. The triangular and angular features of the character dictates that this person is pretty much a villain. find that quite a bit in nature with snakes, that they have the triangular heads tend to be more venomous than the ones that have rounded heads. For Stamy, again, was based loosely on a person that I had known in college, and in name only, but when it came to appearance, she sort of is a merger of 2 or 3 women that I had known throughout my life. One thing that I did want to have with the Stamy character was this sort of asymmetrical face in which her mouth is a bit crooked. I don't know, there's something about it that just sort of attracted me to having a character that looked like that, like somebody who was like very superficial, very into looks and fashion, but yet, you know, she's not exactly perfect herself, which is oftentimes the case of what you see when people are very judgmental. But Stamy was a woman that I had gone to college with. She lived in the apartment building of one of my close friends when I was going to college, and she had what would have been the biggest Rottweiler I think I've ever seen in my life. It looked like a bear. So she walked around town, and I always thought Stamy was such a bizarre name. I'd never heard of it before. I thought she had basically concocted the name on her own and it wasn't really her name, but apparently it was. And so that always stuck with me. It was such an interesting, unique name that I decided, why not name one of the villains after her? And so that was Stamy. Here we go with the essentially the muscle of the group, who is a big, rumored to be middle-aged man in elementary school, and his name is, of course, Trent. Originally he was named Troy, but then I was told that there was another villain named Troy. There's something with the characters with the names that start with T that just, I guess it like inevitably makes you think of as a villain or a bully. So for Trent, he looks a little bit like a friend of mine, but just the average stocky sort of like sports freak bully that you would always encounter in high school mostly, or elementary school. It was a lot of fun to draw. I sort of was kind of going back to the old Hanna-Barbera way of holding hands like that, where they sort of like have the fingers sprouting out like bananas behind them. And here we go. Obviously we're starting off with a rounded head, so therefore it's going to be another good guy. This is Cooper. It's one of Mark's closest friends. Eden is probably his longest friend that he had met when they were babies, but then didn't really get into the history of it, but Cooper and Mark become friends in elementary school. So that was Cooper. For this one, it was a lot of fun because this is the actual sidekick, who is a paper bag puppet. Now, it's a paper bag puppet that comes to life. We all have made these, especially in elementary school, sometimes at camp, and it's hands down the easiest character to draw because it's nothing more than rectangles and squares with little hands and little feet. So, character name Baggy, it's not exactly the most original name, but that would be a name that some kid would probably name a paper bag puppet. And there you have it. That is the cast of characters. So Baggy was the last. He is the smallest one, and yeah, no, there's a rumor that he may have his own graphic novel coming up, but you never know. We'll have to see. And there you have it. One thing I really want you to keep in mind is that this is an incredibly compressed look at the process. The footage in this video was compiled over several days, and what you saw was about 20% of everything that went into the design of these characters. I went through a ton of paper, a lot of sharpened pencils, and of course things were a bit frustrating from time to time, but nonetheless, you gotta take your time and have fun with the process, discovering your characters. That's it for now, and I'll be back with another video, and hopefully we will be wrapping things up pretty soon. Thanks for joining, and once again, be like water, my friends. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the drawing process for this book. This was easily the hardest and longest part of the whole process. The reason for that was because I wasn't an illustrator. However, I am now. Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. In this video, I'm going to be discussing the whole process I went through to illustrate my book. Now, keep in mind that the process I talk about may or may not work for everyone, and to be honest, I already see ways that I can improve for the next one. First, I had a hard copy of the book, jotted down all the points that I thought would be visually interesting or important to the story. The good news was that there were a lot of good moments that would make for some really good illustrations. Bad news was that there were a lot of good moments that I thought would make for good illustrations. I had a massive list, and not being an illustrator, it looked like yet another daunting task, which it was. I went through the list and got it down from the original 200 plus potential illustrations all the way down to 125. After having the list completed, I started to think about the best way to approach in getting them done. One approach, of course, was to do them the natural way, and that is to hand draw them. I tried that for a very short amount of time and realized very quickly that I just was not at that skill level that I needed to be at in order to get those clean, confident lines in the illustrations. So I decided to rough everything out in Photoshop with blue line. As many of you know, in the world of comic books, artists tend to draw in blue graphite and then ink directly on top of them when they are working traditionally. The pencil roughs of this book were really fun, and a lot of it had to do with the fact that I wasn't spending too much time on them, as you could probably tell. The challenges I faced were probably what you would expect. I actually had to draw what was written, and what was written was a lot of stuff that I had never even attempted to draw before. That's where the internet comes in handy, my friends. I was able to look everything up, and in no time found references for certain things like horses or just bicycles. Once the penciling was done, I moved everything over to Clip Studio Pro, where I used the fast pen nibs to ink everything that I had penciled. This gave the final art a lot of clarity. Though I do still prefer hand-drawn art, I was pretty happy with the results. Feeling pretty good about the illustrations, I couldn't help but get the sense that they just didn't have much weight to them. So I decided on a whim to go back and add a little bit of shading on a layer, and what a difference that made. Completely transformed the art. So from then on, I had to go back, added shading to all the illustrations on a single multiply layer, and that did the trick. Once again, it was a very long process, but like everything else, you just have to keep going, and soon you'll be over that mountain. Well, that's about it. Thanks for hanging out, and I will catch you on the next one. As always, be like water, my friends. In this video, we're going to talk about the final stage of production, and that is the assembling of the book itself. Spoiler alert, it was hands down the most frustrating part of the whole process. Hi guys, and thank you so much for joining me once again. Today I'm going to be talking about the final assembly of the actual book. I sent my manuscript off to the uber patient editors over at EJL Editing, and they did a bang-up job, not just with correcting it, but also explaining as to why they made the changes that they had made. Before that, they asked me questions about how I would like to see the final manuscript, and they created a style guide just for me. It's a huge amount of work, and I can't get over just how affordable it all really was. Definitely check them out for all your editing needs, and trust me, it is a lot better to let the professionals deal with your editing. I, for one, am too close to the writing, and after a while, a lot of the things can slip through the cracks. Once the edited manuscript came back and I had my final art ready to go, it was time to actually start putting it all together. I used Adobe InDesign, and this was a total crash course in the program for me. I have Adobe Suites, and like many of you out there are a few programs that I just never open up, and InDesign was one of those. Pretty quickly I realized I needed to watch a few tutorials, and even though I did, it didn't seem to help. I got the basic idea out of it, but there were a lot of things that this program could do that seemed to be out of my control. One of the best tutorials I saw was when it opened up and a woman said, if you have a lot of experience in Photoshop or other Adobe programs, it's just not going to help you. Very true. After hearing that, I began to understand what they meant, and I approached the program with a completely open mind. I am obviously by no means a regular user, but I will say that like everything else in life, the first time is the hardest, and what you learn by making mistakes is invaluable. One thing that took a lot of time was that the mistake of not having the font and the spacing solidified before I began putting the illustrations in. I thought that once everything was in place, that when the font size or spacing adjusted, that the illustrations would just adjust along with them. That was not the case. Breaking your book up into multiple files will take away the ripple effect when you make changes. For instance, if you made a big change in chapter 3 that requires big shifts in the illustrations, but the file that you're working with only goes up to chapter 6, then the shifting of those illustrations will not have to be cascading through the entire 30 or so chapter book that you're working with. This is a very powerful program, and if you want to jump into it and do it yourself, you need to be very patient with it. If you have the funds, I highly suggest getting a graphic designer to take over this stage. There's a reason graphic designers exist, and it's for this very thing. They're well worth the money, and they think completely differently when it comes to images and text than the average writer. As you can imagine, this is a process in which you have to continually go through what you have and make sure that nothing has slipped out of place. Once you're happy, all you do is export that PDF and you're done. That's it. Next up, we're going to be talking about the cover. Thank you so much for joining me, and like always, be like water, my friends. If there is one thing that I think everyone can agree on as the most fun part of making a book on your own, it's gotta be the cover. Hi guys, and thanks for joining me today. Well, as they say, it's just running downhill from here. We are done with the book. All the illustrations and text are as they should be and wrapped up in a nice PDF. Now it's time for the cover, and almost as importantly, the back cover. At this point, you actually have the size that you want your book printed in, and the height measurements will be the same. The width is what is going to be a little bit of a guessing game and will almost always need adjusting. I know a lot of people who commission artists to do the front and back cover give the wrong measurements because they don't take one thing into account, and that is the spine. In particular, the thickness of the spine. Depending on how many pages your book has, it's going to dictate how thick that spine will need to be, and that number is, of course, going to fluctuate just by sheer millimeters, but it will throw things off if you do not have the correct size. KDP provides templates for book covers, and as good as they are, they're just not perfect. Inevitably, you're going to have to do a little bit of adjusting to the size of the cover, and if you are doing this on your own, keep everything on a separate layer, or if you have someone helping you, make sure that you do have an understanding with them that there is going to be a lot of changes and a lot of drafts before you come to that final export of the cover. Now let's get into the breakdown of my cover. When I was trying to come up with the idea for the cover, I kicked around a lot of designs, and early on, I really wanted to pay tribute to the posters that were created for films before the films even got made. Believe it or not, art sometimes was created in order to raise money to make the actual movie. That's why there are certain posters where the characters just don't look the same as they do in the actual movie. One of the best examples is Mad Max. If you look at that poster, you quickly realize it's clearly not Mel Gibson being painted. Another influence were the book covers done by Frank Frazetta, as well as his contemporary at the time, Boris Vallejo. They often feature someone holding up a sword in a dominant manner, and they're flanked by the main character's confidants and companions. It's been spoofed, but I still love the look of that. Also, the title of the book is meant to sound like a Saturday morning cartoon. If you throw all that into a blender, you get this. Like with everything else, it all starts with a sketch. I knew I didn't really want line art for the cover, and as I had mentioned before, a more painterly approach was what I was looking for. So I hopped back into Photoshop and went to work with some of the custom brushes I had acquired over the years. I kept everything on a separate layer so that I could make adjustments later on. This is probably the most important thing you can do, and it will save you a lot of grief. One thing you have to keep in mind is to label each of the layers so that you don't end up wasting a lot of time searching for the right one. One layer you will definitely need access to is the layer with the template of the cover that KDP supplies you. When the cover was done, I exported it and thought it was perfect, but it got rejected. I needed to have more width to account for the pages of the manuscript. Luckily, I had everything on layers and was able to slide things around a bit, just to add that little extra width to the image. And in the pretty short amount of time, I had everything fixed. The cover was good to go, and I sent off for a proof copy. It's gonna be pretty crazy to see it in print. And in the next video, the final reveal. Thank you so much for joining me, and as always, be like water, my friend. Well, this is it. No, it's not the final video I'm ever gonna post. I'm not gonna let you guys off that easy. It is done, and it is now on sale. I just wanted to say a very big thank you to those who have been so encouraging to me over this period, even if they really weren't sure what I was up to. And to be honest, most people really didn't know that I was doing this. When it comes to my work, I tend to be very quiet about what I'm up to until it's done, and then when I release it, they're generally surprised. But then they kind of think, well, he's probably up to something. I haven't heard from him in a while. Creating anything is an incredibly lonely process until it's done. And that is something that I wanted to talk about in this video. Now that the book is done, many people have come to me with a very common question and asked, well, how long did it really take you to do this? Well, truth be told, I really never thought of how much time I was spending there in front of the keyboard or hunched over the drawing tablet, but it was a very significant amount of time. This is something you need to be prepared for. I know when you look over all the videos that I've posted in this series, it's going to look like everything just poured out seamlessly and that there's no time in between the videos or anything. And the truth is that is far, far from the truth. Many of those steps took a long, long time to get through. What you are planning on doing is going on a journey down a road that is so long, you won't even know what season it is when you come to its end. All I can say is to stick to it. As a wise man once said, the richest place on earth is the graveyard with all of its unrealized ideas. Truer words have never been spoken, at least not on this video. It's going to be harder than you think, and that is okay. You will survive. No one at the end of the day is going to care about what was going on in your life or what you had to go through to finish it. They just want it to be good and they want it to be done. Working hard for something that you create is always worth it. And now for the real reason we're here. Seeing this in person is, to be honest, pretty bizarre because, well, it's real now. It's got pages and illustrations that are all by me. For the longest time, it simply existed as an idea in my head. Then it became a ton of note cards, then a manuscript, and occasionally I did some illustrations for it. Well, now it exists. It's always going to exist. In some ways, it's exactly as I thought it would be, and in other ways, it's actually better than I thought it would be. For one thing, the paper quality is a lot better than I thought it was going to be. It's pretty sturdy stuff, and it holds the ink really well. There's no smudging going on. I kind of thought it was just going to be that kind of pulpy stuff. It is not. It's actually really well made. This is a 8.5 by 5.5. And I believe it is the second smallest size you can get through KDP, which is fine because this is a good size for Kidlit. But looking ahead, when I want to release more titles intended for a more mature or perhaps immature audience, I would really like to see if they could do the small pocketbook paperbacks. I'm a big fan of that size. But that's a discussion for another video at another time. Now that this is out in the world, I'm going to share the link down below where you can purchase it. And for those who are thinking about purchasing it, or those that have been nice enough to buy it already, I would greatly appreciate it if you left a little review, good, bad, or indifferent. It really does help with the book sales and helps to get the word out. Well, that's it for this short series. I will be back with more reviews of art materials and more updates on upcoming book releases, as well as the struggle to get them out in the world. That's going to be a fun one. Thanks for joining me, and as always, be like water, my friends.